It started as one last adventure, before adulthood pulled them in different directions. On a warm Thursday morning in July of 2013, four close friends loaded their bags into a silver Toyota Highlander and left Columbus, Ohio, with a playlist full of summer songs and no real timeline. They were recent graduates from Ohio State University, 22 years old, full of nervous energy about the future and clinging to the final thread of freedom before life became resumes, leases, and job offers. Their names were Rachel Vaughn, Donnie Herrera, Ethan Moss, and Jordan Bell. 2 women, 2 men, 2 couples, sort of. They'd been friends since freshman orientation, drawn together by dorm assignments and mutual majors. But it was the road trip that made them feel like a unit, like something real. The plan was flexible. Drive southeast into the Appalachians, explore the Blue Ridge Parkway, camp for a few nights, maybe find some hidden waterfalls, then take the scenic way back up through Tennessee or West Virginia. They didn't make reservations. They didn't tell anyone a strict itinerary. It wasn't that kind of trip. What they did do was send one final photo from the road. It was posted to Rachel's Instagram at 2:47 p.m. on July 11th. The caption read, "Refueling before the wild begins." The image showed the 4 of them lined up in front of a small rest stop near the North Carolina-Virginia border, smiling, holding energy drinks and snack bags, the Highlander visible behind them with the back hatch open. Rachel, in denim shorts and a red tank top, leaned against the driver's side door. Danny, wearing a bucket hat and oversized sunglasses, flashed a peace sign. Ethan had one arm draped around Jordan, whose smile looked tired but genuine. It was an ordinary moment. A timestamp in digital memory. That was the last time anyone ever saw them. By the following Monday, concerned parents began calling each other. None of them had heard from their kids since Thursday. At first, no one panicked. Maybe they lost signal. Maybe they were off-grid. Maybe it was intentional. But by Tuesday, when no one returned home as expected, the group's parents started calling local police departments along the route, trying to report something that didn't yet fit into a clean category. 4 adults, in their 20s, on a spontaneous trip, no proof of a crime, just silence. A missing persons report was filed with the Columbus Police Department that night. It was quickly transferred to state authorities, then bounced around across jurisdictional lines: Virginia State Police, the National Park Service, and eventually the FBI. The problem was, no one knew where they'd disappeared. There was no signal cutoff, no last call or text that said, "Help" or "We're lost." Just a sudden void in every direction. Within days, search efforts launched across the Blue Ridge region. Aerial scans, park ranger sweeps, missing posters tacked onto, trailhead signs. The photo from the rest stop was printed and handed to gas station clerks and diner waitresses. Investigators tried to reverse engineer their potential route based on the photo's geotag and credit card purchases. One transaction was logged at a gas station in a town called Meadows of Dan, Virginia, $37.12 for gas and snacks. After that, the trail went cold. There were no highway surveillance hits, no traffic stops, no toll crossings that matched their license plate. Nothing. The Highlander had vanished like it had never been there. Local news stations picked up the story first. Then national outlets like CNN and NBC ran short segments. 4 OSU graduates vanish in Blue Ridge Mountains. Viewers across the country speculated wildly. Some thought it was a runaway scenario, that maybe they'd staged their own disappearance. Others floated darker theories: abduction, murder, cult initiation. Social media exploded with theories, clues, false sightings. A woman in Georgia claimed she saw a girl matching Danny's description at a rest stop bathroom, staring blankly. Another man in Tennessee swore he passed a Highlander with Ohio plates veering off a back road near Cherokee National Forest. None of it led anywhere. Search and rescue teams combed areas within a 60-mile radius of the rest stop photo, deploying dogs, drones, and infrared equipment. But the terrain was dense and endless. Steep switchbacks, abandoned coal roads, overgrown fire trails, the kind of places where even locals get turned around. No tire tracks, no campfire remnants, no signs of human presence. By the third week, momentum stalled. The families were given regular updates, none of them helpful. Rachel's mother, Lorraine Vaughn, later said in an interview, "I just wanted a sign. Anything. A shoe, a phone, something to tell me they were still out there." In private, the families began to break down. Ethan's father, a former sheriff's deputy, drove for days retracing every road between Columbus and the Blue Ridge. He even hired a private investigator who spent months mapping cell tower dead zones, hoping to triangulate a route they might have taken. Every theory pointed in a different direction, but none gave them back their kids. After 6 weeks, the story fell off the headlines. The world moved on. The case slipped quietly into the unsolved files, another entry in a long list of missing persons cases with no resolution. The families kept their children's names alive on Facebook pages, in local fundraisers, on missing persons billboards. But the silence grew heavier each year. What haunted people most wasn't just that they vanished, it was how perfectly they vanished. No debris, no witnesses, no distress. Like the mountains swallowed them whole. And for 12 years, that's exactly what it looked like. Until a crew of road workers clearing a forgotten hillside near the Dan River came across something buried beneath the slope, something sealed in time, just waiting for the right moment to be found. The Blue Ridge search operation unfolded with urgency, but also quiet desperation. Within 48 hours of the last known sighting, law enforcement across 2 states coordinated with park rangers, U.S. forestry agents, and volunteer SAR teams to comb over 50 square miles of wilderness. The terrain was unforgiving, twisting ravines, collapsed mine shafts, dense pine thickets, and steep elevation drops that could swallow a vehicle without leaving a trace. Helicopters swept through the air with FLIR imaging systems, picking up heat signatures by day and night. Cadaver dogs were brought in from out of state. A fleet of drones scanned ridgelines and fire roads. Each hour that passed without a lead felt like a door closing behind them. But nothing turned up. Not a single torn backpack, not a dropped phone, not even a loose trail of disturbed brush. For such a remote place, it was as if the forest had learned to hide its secrets well. Searchers who'd worked dozens of rescues before said it was strange. There was no scent trail, no dispersal pattern, no signs of panic or injury, just absence, over and over again. Theories began circulating quickly, both inside and outside the investigation. Law enforcement had to balance public pressure, family desperation, and a growing list of what-ifs. Some speculated the group had simply gotten lost, taken a wrong turn onto one of the many old forestry roads that weren't listed on GPS systems. Others believed something darker happened, an encounter with the wrong person, maybe even planned foul play. One particularly persistent theory suggested they'd been targeted by a survivalist cult rumored to be squatting deep in the national forest. But there was no proof, just the empty space where 4 lives used to be. The families wanted answers, the public wanted closure, and the media wanted a story. For the first 2 weeks, national news networks aired the case, almost nightly. But as attention grew, so did the noise. Social media exploded with amateur sleuths dissecting photos, questioning timelines, even accusing the families themselves of hiding something. On Reddit, users began mapping out speculative routes the group may have taken. A YouTube creator released a video claiming that Rachel's last Instagram post contained coded GPS coordinates if you reverse engineered the filter metadata. It was nonsense, but people believed it. Grief had gone viral. The most credible early lead came from a park ranger, stationed near Rocky Knob, just off the Blue Ridge Parkway. He claimed that on the evening of July 11th, the same day the group went dark, he saw a silver SUV slowly navigating an unmarked gravel fire road known as Trail Hollow Access. It matched the Highlander's description, but by the time he circled back to check, it was gone. The ranger didn't think much of it at the time. Fire roads were often used by campers looking for dispersed sites off the main grid. But now, in retrospect, the sighting felt eerie, like a brief glimpse of something slipping into shadow. Investigators tried to track the fire road sighting, but GPS data failed them. Cell towers in the region were sparse and unpredictable. None of the group's phones pinged after 3:12 p.m., the day they vanished. Credit cards remained unused. Social media went dark. No data footprint to follow. In the digital age, that was almost unheard of. It was like they had stepped back in time and off the map. In the weeks that followed, investigators began conducting interviews with friends and family. What they found wasn't alarming, but it wasn't exactly stable either. Rachel and Ethan, once inseparable, had recently broken up. According to Rachel's sister, they were still on good terms, but tensions had resurfaced just days before the trip. There were reports of a late-night argument outside Rachel's apartment. Ethan had moved some of his things out 2 nights before they left. Their friends described the trip as a kind of healing getaway, a last chance to salvage their friendship before real life set in. Then there was Jordan. Jordan Bell was always the quiet one, thoughtful, calculated. He was majoring in mechanical engineering and had just landed a post-grad internship in Colorado. But in private messages uncovered later, it became clear that Jordan had been holding something back. A classmate told police that Jordan had recently confided in him something about telling the truth before the trip. No one knew what that meant exactly, but rumors began swirling. There were whispers that Jordan had been considering backing out of the trip altogether. Some thought he was hiding a health issue. Others hinted at something more personal, something that may have changed the group dynamic just enough to cause a fracture. But if there was conflict, it left no trace. There were no emergency calls, no text messages sent in anger or fear. Only the calm before the silence. By late August, the case began to lose traction. Search teams pulled back. The official statement was that all viable routes had been explored, and without new evidence, resources had to be reassigned. The parents were told to stay hopeful, a phrase that became harder to swallow with each passing week. Behind closed doors, the families weren't just grieving, they were unraveling. Lorraine Vaughn, Rachel's mother, stopped working. She kept her daughter's bedroom untouched, down to the pair of sandals left by the closet. She spoke to Rachel's voicemail every morning before sunrise. Danny Herrera's father, a stoic military man, broke down in an interview and confessed that he still left the porch light on every night. "I want her to know she can come home," he said, voice trembling, even if she forgot how. The Moss family mortgaged their house to hire a private search firm. They distributed their own flyers, organized civilian grid searches, and tracked down leads the police had dismissed. One of those leads came from a trail maintenance worker who reported hearing distant shouting near Raven Knob Trail. But when authorities followed up, it was chalked up to echo patterns in the valley. Nothing held. Jordan's mother stopped giving interviews altogether. She told a friend, "I'm not looking for a miracle. I'm just looking for a bone." After 2 months, the story faded from the national spotlight. The missing poster stayed pinned to gas stations and trailhead boards, but the public stopped asking questions. Other cases took their place. The silence grew deeper. The mystery remained intact. But even after the formal search ended, something lingered, an unease that never quite went away. People said the area felt different. Hikers avoided certain ridgelines. Locals whispered about the woods swallowing things whole. For years, that section of the park became a no man's land. Too quiet, too clean. And then, nearly a decade later, a simple road expansion crew unknowingly dug straight into the one place no one had ever thought to look. In the weeks after the disappearance, the investigation turned inward. If search teams couldn't find them on the ground, maybe the data could tell a story. The FBI's Digital Forensics Division joined state police analysts in combing through phone records, cloud backups, and metadata from every available device tied to the group. It wasn't a lot. These were college grads on a camping trip, not cybercriminals. But whatever breadcrumbs they could find, they followed. The last confirmed digital footprint came from Danny's debit card. On July 11th at 3:06 p.m., it was used to buy gas, firewood, and snacks, trail mix, bottled water, and 2 cans of bug spray at a small roadside station in Patrick County, Virginia, just a few miles off Route 58. The timestamp was critical. It narrowed their position to a 20-mile radius and confirmed that, at least at that point, the group was alive, mobile, and functioning normally. Minutes later, Rachel's phone connected to a cell tower north of the Dan River Basin. It was a brief, 5-second handshake. Not enough to log a message or call, but just enough to leave a ghost trace. After that, nothing. Investigators mapped out every plausible turnoff between the gas station and the dead zone. There were hundreds of them. Dirt roads with washed-out signage, fire access gates that hadn't been maintained in decades, rutted paths that weren't even marked on park maps. It was a lattice of possibilities. Any one of them could have led to the wrong bend, a flat tire, a wrong turn, a fall. The problem wasn't just that the trail went cold, it was how cleanly it stopped. No texts, no app logins, no photos synced, as if every device had been dropped into a black hole. It wasn't normal. Even in areas with poor coverage, phones will try to reconnect, will ping, and off distant towers. But there was no digital struggle, no dying battery signals. It was like 4 people had collectively vanished from the grid in perfect unison. Then came the CB call. 2 days after the disappearance, a local trucker passing through the elevated curve near Lover's Leap Overlook reported something strange over Channel 19. Just after midnight, a weak transmission cut through the static. Male voice, faint but urgent. The words weren't clear, but he remembered this. "We're lost. There's fog everywhere. Can't see anything." He'd written it down that night in a roadside diner napkin, unsure what to do with it. He didn't even report it until he saw the missing poster at a truck stop 3 days later. By then, the airwaves were quiet. No one ever confirmed whether the voice was Ethan's or even if it came from that group. The CB signal was untraceable. Still, investigators logged it as a potential clue. The idea of fog took root quickly. That area was notorious for sudden mountain fog banks that rolled in without warning, dense, blinding, and disorienting. Dozens of accidents had occurred over the years on back roads shrouded in low visibility. If the group had pulled on to an unpaved spur trail, trying to camp for the night, it was easy to imagine a scenario where fog obscured the edge of a drop, or a sharp turn became a fatal mistake. But without tire marks, broken limbs, or debris, it was just a theory. One more possibility, in a case already choked with dead ends. 6 months after the initial report, the FBI closed its active file on the case. Their official designation, low viability missing adult persons. It wasn't a judgment, just an operational classification. The agency had limited resources, and without new evidence, there was nothing more they could do. The withdrawal crushed the families. They'd held on to hope that federal attention would lead to satellite scans, deeper drone searches, even topographical modeling. But the reality was cruel. Unless a body turned up or a vehicle was discovered, the case would remain in stasis. The Vaughns filed a formal appeal. The Herreras tried to raise money for private aerial imaging. Jordan's mother wrote letters to every congressman she could find, but nothing changed. Behind the scenes, the psychological toll began to show. Lorraine Vaughn stopped answering calls. She spent most of her days driving aimlessly through the countryside near where her daughter disappeared. She said it gave her peace to see the trees, even if they might have been the last thing Rachel ever saw. Danny's father started drinking again. He'd been sober nearly a decade before the trip. Ethan's little brother dropped out of school that winter and stopped speaking about Ethan entirely. Jordan's mother, once a reserved, meticulous woman, began making strange Facebook posts late at night, quotes from survival manuals, scripture verses, topographic screenshots of ravines and sinkholes. People move through grief in their own way, but with missing persons, grief doesn't follow the same path. There's no finality, no obituary, no grave to visit, just the ache of possibility, the unbearable weight of maybe. Over time, the story faded. The rest stop photo became a relic, circulated only on cold case forums and digital archives. The napkin with the CB message stayed tacked to a bulletin board at the diner, but the ink had faded to near nothing. Occasionally, a local hiker would report seeing something odd in the woods, a shoe, a backpack strap, a bit of fabric, but every time law enforcement followed up, it led nowhere. 12 years passed like that. Long, slow, and brutal. And then, in the spring of 2025, a crew working on a minor road expansion project near a section of Route 58 west of the Dan River struck something just beneath the tree line. It wasn't metal piping or loose rock. It was the corner of a rusted rear bumper, buried beneath 12 years of earth and silence. Every case we cover isn't just a story, it's weeks of digging through real records, verifying facts, and honoring lives that deserve to be remembered. If you want us to keep uncovering the truth behind these mysteries, please like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments which part of today's case stayed with you. And for more mysterious cold cases, the links are waiting in the description below. Now, let's get back to the case. It wasn't a detective or a search team that found them. It was a construction crew, just doing their job. In March of 2025, a two-man excavation team with the Virginia Department of Transportation was clearing brush and grading a drainage slope along a rural stretch of Route 58, part of a modest road-widening project just west of the Dan River. The area wasn't remote by wilderness standards, but it was isolated enough that the road saw more deer than traffic after dusk. As the operator swung the excavator bucket into a thicket of vines and moss-covered dirt, the claw caught something unexpected: metal, twisted and buried, but not part of any infrastructure. They thought it might have been junked farming equipment, maybe even a long-forgotten hunting trailer. But as the operator swept the debris away, the shape began to take form. A vehicle, silver-gray beneath a crust of clay. The rear end was crushed. The roof was bowed in like a tin can. Only when the earth peeled back further did they see the Toyota emblem still intact on the back hatch. Highlander, local police, responded first. Then, quietly and without fanfare, the state police were called in. By nightfall, the site had been sealed off under portable floodlights. A forensic recovery team began the delicate process of documenting every inch. What they were looking at was a time capsule sealed by 12 years of rain, root growth, and silence. The SUV had plummeted down a steep incline after crashing through a rotted wooden guardrail, one that had long since been overtaken by moss and low brush. The impact site was nearly invisible from the road above. The embankment dropped almost 40 feet before leveling out into a hollow, choked with ferns, fallen logs, and sediment from seasonal runoff. It wasn't just hidden, it was buried. If the road crew hadn't disturbed that exact section of slope, it might have stayed lost forever. Inside the vehicle, the story unfolded piece by piece. The front passenger seat still held skeletal remains, mostly intact. In the driver's seat, another partial skeleton slumped sideways, fused to the seat frame by time and decay. In the rear, Behind the collapsed front seats was a third body, cloaked in shredded fabric and sun-bleached straps from a now faded backpack. Personal effects were scattered loosely across the floor. A cracked phone case, a rusted thermos, a torn hiking boot, a bracelet with faded letter beads spelling Donnie. The forensic team worked through the night. On the passenger side floorboard, beneath a melted fragment of map laminate, they found a partially legible note, just 2 words still visible through water-stained ink: Trail Spur. On the map itself, a circle had been drawn in faded red marker over a thin, unnamed path branching off from the main road. It wasn't labeled on standard maps. Only backcountry hikers or forestry workers would have known it existed. By morning, the recovery was complete. DNA confirmation would take weeks, but inside the forensic command tent, no one doubted who they'd found. Rachel was in the back. Danny and Ethan were in the front. Jordan was nowhere to be seen. News of the discovery didn't break for 3 more days. Authorities needed time to notify the families, coordinate identification procedures, and secure the site. But when it did break, the story spread fast. 12 years of mystery unearthed in a single scoop of earth. Every major outlet ran the story. Breakthrough in 2013 disappearance of Ohio students. Missing road trip case. SUV found after 12 years. But for the families, it wasn't a headline, it was a funeral. Lorraine Vaughn was the first parent brought in to confirm personal items. She identified Rachel's necklace, a small silver charm shaped like a crescent moon, still clinging to the fabric of the shirt. She didn't cry at first. She just stared, hands shaking, then finally whispered. She kept it on even then. Later, in a quiet moment away from the others, she asked the coroner whether Rachel looked like she'd been scared. The coroner didn't know how to answer. The cause of death for all 3 was ruled as a combination of blunt force trauma from the crash and prolonged environmental exposure, likely hypothermia or internal injuries that went untreated. Based on the positioning of the bodies and the damage to the vehicle, investigators believe they lost control sometime late at night, possibly disoriented by fog, and careened through the compromised guardrail before anyone could react. The lack of skid marks suggested they may not have even braked, whether due to zero visibility, exhaustion, or distraction. But one thing didn't fit. Jordan wasn't there. Not in the front, not in the back, not outside the vehicle, not within a 300-foot radius, despite the initial site sweep. It was possible, investigators admitted, that he'd been ejected from the vehicle, but there were no drag marks, no bones scattered through the underbrush, no scraps of clothing, and the Highlander's rear hatch was still sealed shut from the inside. For the families, it was a cruel twist in a story that had already taken so much. 3 children found, 1 still missing. The closure they had begged for came with an asterisk that would not let them rest. Jordan's mother refused to accept the report. She stood at the crash site days later, staring down into the ravine, and said aloud, "He got out. I don't know how, I don't know why, but he got out." She asked if dogs would be used. The answer was yes, but the scent trail was too degraded. They would bring in cadaver dogs, comb the perimeter, and expand the search grid, but they were realistic about the odds. In the back seat, pinned beneath a collapsed headrest, the team found Jordan's journal. Most pages had dissolved into pulp, but one entry remained legible. The handwriting was his. It read, "Danny's bleeding. Ethan's not moving. Rachel can't sit up. Going to climb up the trail. We'll mark the trees. Back soon." That entry changed everything. Now, it wasn't just a missing persons case, it was a survival scenario. Jordan had lived long enough to try for help, long enough to open the door, to climb out, to leave his boots in the mud. But he never made it back. And somewhere out there, beneath years of overgrowth and silence, was whatever came next. When investigators returned to the site the following week, they didn't expect to find anything new. The SUV had already been excavated, its contents catalogued, and the terrain mapped. What remained was a cleanup operation documenting the surrounding radius for any secondary debris field. But 20 feet from where the vehicle had come to rest, one of the technicians noticed something strange in the underbrush. 2 hiking boots. They were upright, perfectly side by side, not tossed or scattered like debris from the crash. And despite 12 years of weathering, they looked wrong, still largely intact. Leather darkened by age but not shredded, not sun-bleached the way everything else was. Inside, soil samples showed signs of more recent exposure. Whoever had placed them there, or whatever had disturbed them, had done so long after the crash. When the boots were lifted, one of the laces was broken clean through as if it had been torn, not frayed. Inside the left boot, stuck to the sole, was a thin scrap of laminated paper, part of an old road map. The ink had run, but one word could still be made out: Dan. Investigators later confirmed it matched the same brand of map found in the SUV's front seat. They widened the perimeter. About 30 yards uphill, searchers discovered what looked like a shallow pit 2 feet wide, 1.5 feet deep. It was empty, but the soil was oddly compacted, as though something had once been buried there. Scattered beside it were fragments of decomposed nylon webbing, consistent with a backpack strap. For a brief moment, the working theory shifted. Maybe Jordan Bell hadn't died in the crash after all. Maybe he'd survived, disoriented but alive, and tried to find help. The journal entry recovered in the car, his last note, supported that idea. Went to find help. Back soon. Stay put. Investigators believed he had written it in the first hours after the accident. The handwriting matched his college notes exactly. The mental image was haunting. A two-year-old kid, battered and shaken, crawling from the wreckage into fog and cold. His friends injured or dying inside the SUV. A steep climb ahead of him, no road in sight, no cell service, just the sound of wind moving through trees. He must have tried to follow the map. Maybe the circled trail spur had been their next planned stop, something familiar he hoped to reach. Investigators speculated that he'd attempted to climb back up toward the road, following the slope's natural incline. It wasn't far in a straight line, maybe 150 yards to the nearest edge, but the terrain was brutal. Slick clay, sharp incline, tangled roots, and heavy growth. Even in daylight, it would have been nearly impossible. At night, in fog, it was suicidal. Search teams traced that incline carefully, flagging every depression, every animal den, every sign of disturbance. About halfway up, they found something lodged in the bark of a dead pine tree. A scrap of green fabric, wedged deep. Forensic analysis later confirmed it was part of a torn jacket lining, consistent with one Jordan had been wearing in the last photo posted online. Around the same area, they also found partial impressions in the soil barefoot, faint but measurable. The barefoot detail disturbed everyone. If Jordan had made it out of the vehicle, why were his boots left behind? Why would he take them off? The weather that night had been damp and cold, with temperatures dropping into the 40 seconds. It didn't make sense unless hypothermia or shock had already set in. Search coordinators mentioned a phenomenon sometimes seen in wilderness deaths called paradoxical undressing, where disoriented victims begin removing clothes as their body temperature plummets. The theory was painful to imagine, but scientifically plausible. As teams pushed further up the ridge, cadaver dogs alerted twice, once near a drainage gully, once at a cluster of boulders overlooking the ravine. Both hits were inconclusive. No remains surfaced that day. The forest was thick with leaf litter, branches, and sinkholes formed over years of erosion. Anything left exposed for a season would have been hidden again by the next. Then, a week later, during a secondary sweep, a volunteer searcher spotted something pale near the base of a rotted tree trunk, about 600 yards north of the crash site. It was small, rounded, and half embedded in the soil. At first, they thought it was a fragment of animal bone. But under the thin crust of dirt, the curve and texture were unmistakable. It was a piece of human skull. DNA analysis confirmed it belonged to Jordan Bell. That discovery should have closed the case, but it didn't. It only deepened the questions. His remains were too far from the vehicle for a typical post-crash ejection. The position of the fragment suggested decomposition and animal activity. Yes, but the clean placement of the boots contradicted that. Experts concluded he had survived for at least several hours, possibly longer, before succumbing to injury, exposure, or exhaustion. But there was no definitive cause of death, no full skeleton, no conclusive story. Theories split into two camps. Some believed Jordan had been delirious, injured, and simply lost his bearings, wandering aimlessly before collapsing somewhere in the woods. Others weren't so sure. The boots placed side by side, the partially filled pit, and the lack of full remains hinted at something that didn't fit neat explanations. One investigator, who later spoke anonymously, said there was something off about the site. He described it as unnaturally still. "You couldn't even hear birds," he said. "It's like the place didn't want to give him back." For the families, the partial discovery was agony. Finding his bone didn't mean finding him. Jordan's mother refused to believe that he had simply died alone in the woods. She was convinced something or someone had been out there with Tim. She pointed to the boots again and again, asking, "Would my son take off his shoes, line them up perfectly, and walk barefoot into the dark?" There was no answer anyone could give her. In time, the scene was cleared, the slope stabilized, and the case file updated. Officially, Jordan Bell's death was ruled undetermined, consistent with post-crash survival and environmental exposure. Unofficially, even among the investigators, the case never sat right. Because sometimes, when you look too closely at what nature keeps hidden, you find things that don't make sense. And in the quiet, forested hollow off Route 58, they'd found just that, an ending that felt like it still wasn't over. When the remains were finally analyzed, the answers were supposed to come. But what the bones revealed wasn't resolution, it was contradiction. The medical examiner's report stated that the three occupants of the SUV, Rachel Vaughn, Donnie Herrera, and Ethan Moss, had most likely died within hours of the crash. The injuries were consistent with blunt force trauma from the impact and possible hypothermia. Ethan's ribs were fractured on the left side. Danny's pelvis had been crushed by the dashboard, and Rachel's spine showed signs of compression, consistent with being thrown forward while restrained. None of it was malicious. None of it indicated foul play. Jordan Bell's partial remains, however, told a different story. His skull fragment showed no fracture, no gunshot residue, no sign of predation. He hadn't been attacked. He hadn't fallen from a height. There was nothing forensic that explained how he died or why he had left the others behind in the first place. When investigators revisited the journal entry found in the SUV, they tried to reconstruct the sequence of those final hours. He must have written it just after the crash when the adrenaline was still high, when hope hadn't yet given way to panic. "Went to find help. Back soon. Stay put." It was such a simple line, so logical, so human. He believed he could climb out, find the road, bring help back. But he never did. The problem was time. Based on decomposition estimates, he might have survived for a full day, maybe longer after leaving the wreck. That meant he could have been alive while search teams were combing the upper sections of the park in those first 48 hours. He was there, somewhere in that same stretch of forest, and they missed him. It's a thought that still eats at people who worked the case. Years later, when the report was declassified, a detail emerged that few outside of law enforcement had ever heard. In the months following the discovery, investigators cross-referenced park ranger data looking for anything unusual near the Dan River corridor during the period of the original disappearance in 2013. That's when they found something in an archived wildlife survey footage from a trail camera that had been set up to monitor black bear movement. The clip was dated August 3rd, 2013, 3 weeks after the crash was believed to have occurred. At 2:13 a.m., the camera recorded a figure moving slowly along the edge of a service trail. It was humanoid, barefoot, wearing what appeared to be a torn green jacket. The figure paused at one point, looked directly toward the lens, then disappeared into the dark. The footage lasted less than 5 seconds. It was grainy, but when enhanced, the proportions matched Jordan's approximate height and build. The timestamp placed it 17 miles from the crash site. No one could say for sure it was him. But the timing, the clothing, even the terrain, it was all within the radius of his last known movement. For Jordan's mother, that clip became both salvation and torment. She watched it endlessly, convinced it was her son still alive, still trying to find a way out of that endless green maze. Others saw something different, someone delirious, lost, and near the end. Footage reignited rumors that had never really gone away. Locals around the Dan River wilderness had long whispered about strange things in those woods, echoes that carried in the wrong direction, footsteps that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Hikers described hearing voices repeating their own words a split second later, as if the sound was bouncing back from places it shouldn't. After the crash site was uncovered, the area developed a quiet reputation. The Virginia State Police eventually fenced off a portion of the slope to prevent trespassers, but that didn't stop people from coming. Some left flowers, others left offerings. One anonymous note pinned to a tree read, "He made it further than anyone knows." The families met for a joint memorial later that year. For the first time, they stood together not as parents of the missing, but as parents of the found. The service took place near the overlook above the crash site, a quiet clearing with a view of the valley. They released 4 lanterns into the dusk sky. 3 drifted upward and disappeared. The 4th flickered, then dipped low into the trees and vanished before reaching altitude. No one spoke about it, but everyone saw it. Closure came in paperwork, not in peace. The official cause of death for Jordan Bell was listed as undetermined. The file was marked inactive, pending future evidence. For investigators, it was the logical conclusion. For the families, it was unbearable. In interviews, the case coordinator admitted that something about the discovery still unsettled him. "You can explain 90% of it," he said. The crash, the fog, the isolation. But there's always that 10%, the piece that doesn't fit. The shoes, the pit, the distance. That last decision he made to walk away. Psychologists who studied survival behavior in isolated wilderness incidents often cite one recurring theme. The mind, when trapped between fear and hope, becomes its own worst compass. People walk in circles, convinced they're making progress. They see patterns in the terrain, lights that aren't there, roads that vanish when they approach. In that state, rationality isn't the first thing to go, it's the last thing they're holding on to, right up until the end. Maybe that's what happened to Jordan. Maybe he saw a glint of road light through the fog that wasn't real. Maybe he was hallucinating from shock, dehydration, or a concussion. Or maybe, as his mother still insists, he saw something else, something that made him take off his boots and step into the dark, believing it would lead him out. No one will ever know for sure. Today, the crash site has been absorbed back into the earth. The guardrail was replaced. The slope was reinforced. Drivers pass by that stretch of Route 58 every day, never knowing what lies just beyond the tree line. The Highlander was eventually removed, its remnants stored in an evidence warehouse in Richmond, tagged and sealed. Every so often, hikers still report strange sounds near the ravine. a voice calling faintly from somewhere down the slope. A metallic echo, like something shifting beneath the soil. When investigators returned to survey the reconstruction site in 2026, one of the crewmen swore he heard what sounded like a single knock on metal coming from below the ridge. They brushed it off. Acoustics can do strange things in that valley. But for those who remember the case, that sound lingers. It's the sound of a question that never really went away: why they turned off that main road, why they vanished so cleanly, and why one of them walked away, only to disappear again. 12 years buried, and the truth still half hidden in the dirt.